everybody, Lisa Romano here, the Breakthrough Life Coach, and today I want to talk about the hippocampus. And I think it's really, really important for those of us who are on the recovery path, who might be struggling, who take our path very seriously. I think it's important that we understand how the hippocampus works and how memory and trauma come together on this path. And the more we understand the hippocampus and the amygdala, and memory also, the better we feel about ourselves, because we realize that we're not crazy, that our brain is actually doing what it was designed to do. And so the hippocampus is a part of the limbic system. I'm going to be reading from my notes. This is the research that I've done and I want to present. So the hippocampus is a part of the limbic system. So the hippocampus helps us store long-term memories, but also helps us remember locations, so spatial memory, like where we live. So it's important that we know where we live, because every time we walk out of the house, we have to remember how to get back home. So the hippocampus actually helps us remember where we are in time and space, and what routes we take to Trader Joe's, what routes we take to school and whatnot. This is all very, very important. And we don't always think about it, but we need to have memory. We have to be able to record data. It's really important that you keep that in your mind. Its main function is related to learning and memory. So while we're 5 and we're learning how to walk to kindergarten, this is becoming part of our memory, and we are memorizing the route to school. Okay? So, but this is what trauma survivors have to understand. Trauma survivors need to appreciate the job of the hippocampus, because the hippocampus's job is to remember trauma, is for memory. So the hippocampus isn't going to remember the time where you fell off your bike and your mom was there and picked you up and coddled you, and that was wonderful. But the job of the hippocampus is to help you memorize events and recall events. And so the hippocampus is also going to remember the traumatic event. Perhaps there was some form of abuse from a neighbor, or there was some type of an abuse from a coach, or your dad, or your brother, or your sister, or whatever, someone in the family, or there was a car accident. The brain is designed to remember good as well as the bad. And the brain will also remember the bad over the good. I'll get to that. The hippocampus learns what happens. The hippocampus is designed to remember bad things because when we are under stress, we actually secrete cortisol. And studies have proven that when there are high levels of cortisol in the bloodstream, that whatever's happening in the moment, we remember over another event. So it's very, very important that we recognize that. While we're growing up, our brain is recording everything. And so let's say dad's an alcoholic, right? I'm in a learning mode. I know that when daddy grabs the beer, he's going to sit on the couch. He's going to start drinking this beer. Mom's going to get angry. I'm learning about mom's facial expressions, all getting downloaded. If violence erupts or screaming and yelling erupts, my cortisol levels go up. I'm sensing danger, danger, danger. Peace is gone, right? It's not a safe environment anymore. I feel threatened. And when children see mommy and daddy fight, they feel threatened because mommy and daddy are everything to them, right? And so cortisol levels go up. My brain is recording what's happening in the now at an amazing rate. And I will remember this painful event. That is what the brain is designed to do. It's trying to get me to record this data so I can avoid it in the future. The hippocampus is learning about dad's drinking, learning about dad's facial expressions, learning what mom does, and it's also learning what we do under stress. So if I fawn and I go grab dad another beer, or I try to take care of mommy, this becomes part of my long-term memory as well. If I flee and run out of the house, then later on, what becomes a pattern is when this starts to happen, I leave. If I learn to hide under my bed, this becomes part of what my learning is all about also, that I've learned that when daddy does this, I do that. So the hippocampus is related to learning and memory. There are two types of memory. I'm going to do a video about memory, but for argument's sake, it's important that we recognize that the hippocampus helps store two types of memory. That's declarative memory, meaning facts. This is what happened, and this is what showed up when that thing happened. Daddy pops open a beer, or mommy has this conversation, or mommy does that, and then this happens. These are facts, right? So the hippocampus is storing facts. The hippocampus is also responsible for memorizing history and dates and times and a lecture. Let's say you're giving a lecture and you have to memorize this speech. The hippocampus is designed to store declarative or factual-based data. It's also designed to record, like I said earlier, spatial memory. So routes, our routes to school, our routes to work, our routes to the mall, and so on. Very, very important. The hippocampus takes events, right, records it, short-term memory, and then will shunt it to long-term memory. So as it's figuring out what's important, and I believe, I can't prove it, maybe somebody out there will, that I think that cortisol is the marker. If cortisol is present in the bloodstream when an event is taking place, I believe that's the way the brain organizes significant information. That's why so many of us from childhood, we remember the bad things, but we don't remember the good things. That's not our fault. You know, I remember having conversations with my mom when she was alive, and she'd say, "You only remember the bad, Lisa, you only remember the bad." And I would feel so much shame over that because it was true. I remembered the bad. Now I understand that because cortisol was present in my bloodstream at particular events, that was like a marker, and my brain remembered that memory over a memory that did not have such an emotional impact on me at the time. Very interesting. Children who are under stress have reduced hippocampal volume. So the hippocampus is related to memory, right? And so think about children who have never, ever, they're high-risk children. They have come from dysfunctional homes, chaos, you name it, right? So think about this child who is under stress, high cortisol in the body, and the hippocampus does not have the ability to increase volume. It's under stress. So they go into school at 3, 4, 5 years old, and they have difficulty with memory. And then we go and we label these children with ADHD. Or they're acting out. Maybe they're acting out because they're frustrated because they can't recall. That's not their fault. So it's important that we recognize that stress actually inhibits the growth of the hippocampus, and thus this could explain why so many of us have trouble recalling an event memory. But we might be able to recall how we felt as a child, but we might not be able to recall the event. Many of my clients tell me that I have this feeling, but I can't remember. It's very normal. And it's important that we recognize that those of us who come from very, very stressful homes and very, very stressful childhoods, if we have a reduced volume of reduced volume in the hippocampus, in that area of our brain, this is absolutely going to affect our memory. People with depression it's suggested that they have a 20% they have a 20% decrease in hippocampus volume. I mean, that's really incredible. So people who are depressed are under a lot of stress. So is stress doing this to the hippocampus? The research is suggesting that it just might be. Under stress, emotional memory is enhanced. Emotional memory, what we feel. But what's impaired is short-term recall. So it's really important that those of us who feel bad about remembering bad things but we're not able to remember good things, or we just can't remember the event, it's important that we recognize that under stress, emotional memory is enhanced, but short-term recall is impaired. So we can remember how we felt, but not always know why. So cortisol actually decreases the ability of the hippocampus to encode memory and recall memory. And so it's important that we recognize how significant cortisol is. So we'll have an emotional memory, but we'll have a difficult time recalling memory that's related to events. In one experiment, researchers exposed rats to cats for 5 consecutive weeks, and they discovered after 5 weeks, when they stopped exposing the rats to cats, that the rats could not adapt to new situations, and they had impaired memory. Another interesting finding when it comes to cortisol is that cortisol and stress is known to lead to dementia. Remember that memory is associated to the hippocampus. So it's important that we recognize when we're thinking about memory, we remember the hippocampus, and we remember that stress impairs our ability to recall, that cortisol may enhance our ability to have an emotional feeling, but we may not remember exactly what happened. But I think it's important to recognize that research is pointing in the direction that cortisol and stress is known to lead to dementia. One more thing I want to say about the hippocampus and stress and cortisol is that the stress hormone cortisol strengthens painful and scary experiences. So cortisol not only strengthens a frightening memory at the time, but it also when we remember the memory. So this dovetails into thinking about post-traumatic stress and how many of us, when we think back to an experience, we are actually recalling the event and we're having the emotional flashback. And so cortisol not only strengthens a memory, an emotional memory, or a scary memory in the moment, it's important that when cortisol is present in the body and we recall an event, that memory is enhanced as well when we recall it. When we are recalling a memory, right, or an event that's past, this is called reconsolidation. When we have a memory, if cortisol is high, our emotional memory will be stronger after each retrieval. So it's important that when we think about what's happening to us, we understand the way the brain works. Why? So we don't freak out. So if I have a painful event that's happened to me in the past, right? If I'm remembering that painful event and cortisol is high, I'm going to have an emotional reaction every time I recall that memory. So this really is important information for someone who's trying to recover from trauma. We have to understand how the hippocampus works. We have to understand that our bodies have been designed to remember. If everything went well and we never experienced anything painful or traumatic, then we would have wonderful things downloaded into our hippocampus, and we wouldn't have to worry about, painful stimuli, and we wouldn't have to worry about living in a dissociated state or suicidal ideation, trying to escape our pain, right? When we think about this idea that the hippocampus is actually designed to remember, then those of us who have experienced trauma, we can respect the fact that our brain is just remembering what's happened. And it's supposed to. The question is, what do we do with that information once we understand, these painful things have happened, my brain has recorded what has happened, I was 2 years old when it happened, or 4-year-olds or 6-year-olds or whatever, it doesn't matter. When this was happening to me and I felt overwhelmed and I did not have the ability to handle the stress in the moment, think about a child that watches its dog get hit by a car or sexual abuse. We don't have the abilities to handle what's happening to us in the moment. We are powerless. Our body floods with cortisol, right? Whatever is happening in the moment, we remember that emotional memory. That's not our fault. That's what the brain is designed to do. If we've never had these experiences, then we can go out our merry way in life, right? And we don't have these triggers. Our brain is not recalling these memories. Okay, fine. But if you're like everybody else on planet Earth, you've experienced trauma. It's very easy to traumatize a child. A mother can get up or a father can get up off the couch, walk into another room. A 2-year-old can turn around and feel powerless and be traumatized by, where is my mother? So it's important that we recognize that most of us have been traumatized, and because our hippocampus is designed to remember, we're going to remember, if not consciously, viscerally. Our body, like we know, the body is keeping a score of traumatic events. So again, what do we do with this information? I think the first thing that we do is we understand that we're not crazy if we're having emotional triggers. Okay, we're not crazy. I think what we can do is we can work at perhaps remembering painful events, but we do it when our cortisol levels are low. That might help us discharge some energy associated with a painful event. I think that's one of the directions that we can go in. But certainly what has helped many of us, including myself, as well as the people I've coached personally have taken my programs, is understanding how the brain works. Once we understand how the brain works, so much of the fog and the clouds are lifted. We're not crazy. We're not crazy. The question is, what do we do with this post-traumatic stress, which is basically memory recall and the body remembering and exhibiting the same types of feelings we exhibited when the event happened the first time. We should appreciate that every time we have a PTSD response, cortisol levels are high. In the moment of recall, that event is going to be recorded with very strong emotions, and that's the way the brain works. Once we know that, there's a chance we can get out ahead of it, right? Perhaps if we look at our memories with on purpose, rather than wait for them to sneak up on us, that might help us be able to discharge some energy associated to painful events. At any rate, I hope that this information and some of the suggestions that I've offered here today help you love yourself and help you get a little bit more curious about how your brain responds to stress. I hope you understand that all children are powerless and all children are victims of their environment. And children who have been traumatized, who have been exposed to certain stressors that they were unable to deal with at the time, our brains have recorded these events. And that is the way the brain works. So I hope this information has helped you today understand a little bit more about your brain, stress, and how the hippocampus plays in with memory on your healing journey. Namaste. Bye for now.